Yo, what's going on, guys? Hope everybody's having a great day today. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about what is pseudocode and how to go about writing pseudocode so you can solve problems and work on projects more efficiently. So, in my career, I have used pseudocode to help me with pretty big projects. And that's where the requirements were very complex, and I didn't really understand exactly how to go about working with the flow. So, I would write out in plain text exactly what the flow would be and how I would implement it. Okay. Now, depending on the project, you could do this in your head. You don't really have to write it out. But if it's so many different pieces to where it's the logic itself is going to be handled on the back end and is going to be related to different parts of your app, you have to write it out so that you're not introducing more bugs into the application. And make sure that you're actually hitting every single requirement that makes sense, that is critical to this project. So, in a nutshell, pseudocode is just at a high level a description of what the logic or steps is going to be within your program or algorithm, right? And we're using plain language. We're not writing anything in code just yet. We're just trying to understand exactly what we need to do to finish this feature or project, okay? And what problem we're trying to solve initially. So, step one, before you even start writing pseudocode, the first thing you need to do is understand what the problem is. Okay, what is our problem? What are we trying to solve? In this example, I did something very basic. Okay, so if you're looking to route a user to their own personalized dashboard when they log into your application, this is the problem that you're trying to solve. And you would have something like this. When a user tries to log in, if it's successful, we'll send them to their personalized dashboard. If not, we need to display an error that says invalid credentials, right? Plain and simple. This is what we're trying to solve right now. So once we identified our problem, then we need to now write our pseudocode, which is just logic. So think about when we're programming things, right? We're always using logic to solve a problem. So all we're doing is using simple, plain language. Okay. We're not writing anything in JavaScript, C Sharp, Java, all that stuff. We're just writing it in plain language, exactly what we need to do to fully understand how to execute and write our code. Then we're going to focus just on the logic, right? Just the logic. And also make sure that it's readable to others. Make sure that someone that doesn't know code can actually read through the flow and give you feedback. All right. So here I have a good way of writing pseudocode and not necessarily another good way to do it. But if you are only doing it for yourself, it might only work for you, and that's fine. You can get away with it. All right. But for the good way, this is how you would set it up. You would do, if for this problem, we're checking to see if our username and password or our password is empty. If either of those inputs are empty, we need to do something. We need to show the user, like, hey, you cannot proceed further unless you fill this out. So we would validate the username and password inputs. And if any of them are empty, we need to display an error that says username or password cannot be empty. All right. Else, if they satisfy those conditions where the username and password is not empty, we would attempt to send in the login information to validate whether they could log into our application and actually if they have an account. Okay. If they don't have an account, or if the username and password is just invalid, we'll show them invalid username and password as the error. But if it is successful, we found their account, everything checks out with the password. Now we could go ahead and navigate them to their own personalized dashboard. Plain and simple, right? We're not doing anything crazy here. Now, if you're doing this with other developers on your team and you just wanted to show them the flow of how this feature should work and the problem that we're trying to solve here, this right here is perfect. I can understand exactly what's going on, whether I'm an entry level, junior level, mid level, it doesn't matter. Understand exactly what's going on with the flow here. Also, if you wanted to show this to the product manager to get sign off on those requirements, having something as clean as this will get your questions answered. Also, the QA team, right? If they need to test this, they need to understand what the flow is. Yes, the requirements is going to spell all that stuff out, but it's going to be more technical. So having something as simple as this will allow the QA team to actually create test cases and automate those test cases in the future. Okay, if I'm just working on the project by myself, right? Like I'm not working with anybody else, and this is something that I tech plan and I already know what to do, and I've been doing it for years. Then you'll see something where it's just like beg, do the login thing. What does that even mean, right? I know what it means. It means that whatever the user input is, we need to validate it whether it's good or bad. If it's good, then we would continue with the login request. If it's bad, then we need to show some errors. With that being said, step three. What do we need to do once we have our pseudocode? Well, we're gonna just write out our code, right? Like we already understand what the flow is. Now we can write our code successfully and figure out and test whether we satisfy those requirements. So this will be in strict syntax. It could be in any language. This is the beauty of pseudocode. So, like, if it's just JavaScript related, then you already have the JavaScript code there. But if you need to translate the requirements into a different programming language like Python or C Sharp, if you're moving all that validation logic to the back end, you need to have an easier way to read through that flow. Okay, so this allows us to easily translate those requirements, that logic, into any language that we choose, and we'll be able to execute on that. So in this example, I have a React and TypeScript concept, and I'm currently using React and TypeScript for everything right now. So I figured that it would be easier just to kind of showcase how to write this out. So based on our pseudocode here, this is how I would implement the React on submit handler function. So our username and password are going to be string values. It's not going to be a number or anything like that. We need to understand that this is always going to be a string. Okay. And then our on submit handler that's going to handle our pseudocode here. This is how we're going to implement it. So V is going to be the login form type that contains our username and password input fields. And you could probably use a library like React Hook Form to do all this stuff. So you don't have to create the validation logic, and you can use Zod to validate whether the input fields are correct, whether the passwords match accepted criteria for what a strong password should be. So there's a lot of things you could do with it. And it also allows you to not have a bunch of just boilerplate code just for validation stuff or keeping that as a utility function. So if we're using a library like React Hook Form, now we need to validate whether the username and password is actually not empty. If either of those input fields are empty, we need to set the error of our state error. We're going to set the error to username or password cannot be empty. And that would show up in the login form for the user to then start to validate what they did wrong in the form before they submit it. So once they do that, and we validate it again, if the username and password are actually not empty, then we could attempt to log them in using a login validator, right? A backend function. So once we send that in, we should be, and it's successful, we should be able to navigate them to their own personalized dashboard, okay, which is at the bottom here. But say, for example, we have backend issues, right? Like we can't validate that user account. Then we could catch the error of whatever happened with the credentials and then console log the error and then also set the error as invalid username or password. And then that will allow the user to understand exactly what's going on. Just by you not doing this, you're going to run into a lot of issues where the user is going to attempt to log in multiple times. He's not going to get any validation out of that. And it's just going to be a bad user flow. So at least having this concept will get you further, and you can expand on this depending on what the additional requirements are. So based on that, you now have a solution to the problem. You just have to refine it to whatever requirements that you need to do. But that in a nutshell is pseudocode. And I typically do this in my head multiple times, depending on how big or small the project is. If it's something that's super complex, then I'm writing something like this, just to kind of give me a clear picture in terms of how do I write out my logic? Does this make sense? And then also just validate whether I hit every single requirement. And then also using AI too to kind of validate whether I did it correctly and taking that feedback too, because which is very powerful. So that's it, guys. That's the video. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Let me know if you want videos just like this, to where I break down some fundamentals and I can show you some workable code that's fun so that you can actually use this for your projects as well. All right. Talk soon.